Good morning, and what a morning it is. Absolutely chucking it down. You'll probably be able to hear it on the microphone, so I hope you can hear me. And I'll crack on with this. I actually come out for a run this morning, just for a little change. Less things to clean when I get home, basically. So, today's message from Mull is, are you stretching it? And I just want to have a little talk about various forms of stretching, a warning against one in particular, and basically some information on forms of stretching, not actual stretches, but types of stretching that are important to us and hopefully important to you guys as well. So stretching, as we've covered in many talks on the message from Mull, is really important. And it's important to keep your muscle flexibility for your joint function and joint flexibility. Trying to keep those connective tissues pliable so that they can move all the way through their full range of motion. And that helps us with functional capacity and just carrying out activities of daily life. So the things that you would normally do, they become a lot easier if we're flexible and we stretch on a regular basis. And there are different forms of stretching, and I want to cover the one that we want to avoid first, and that is a method called ballistic stretching. And ballistic stretching is when we use part of the body or a limb's momentum to take a joint or muscle tissue beyond its normal range of motion, usually in a quick and quite a ballistic action. So things I'm talking about would be perhaps, instead of just rotating slowly from side to side, we start to really throw it in. We can stretch a dynamic stretch where we lift the foot up to the front there, but in the past you might have seen guys and they can really throw it up really fast. And that sort of action, or the classic one for hamstrings, is, let me see, instead of a slow reach forward, is this sort of thing. Sort of stretches you might have seen in Dad's army. Now, they're a big no-no. We're forcing the muscle tissue to go beyond its normal range of motion, and this comes with a high risk of injury, a high risk of tears. So we want to try to avoid that type of training, type of stretching at all times. You're not really giving the muscle tissue time to settle into the stretch, to lengthen. You're forcing the issue. So please avoid that type of stretching. Another type of stretch which has become a bit more popular is dynamic stretching. And this is what we'll often do at the start of a move well class, for example, at the minute. So it's also important that before we stretch, we're warm. And quite often when we start a class, we're not warm. There's not much heat in the muscle tissue. Blood is mainly held in our core, and we want to move that out into the working tissue. And that takes time. It doesn't happen with the click of a finger. And that's why we tend to walk you around or march you, and it's just a gradual way of, whoops, of moving heat around. So hopefully not that happen anymore. You're balanced precariously on a fence post here. So yeah, we need time to move that blood flow around, and that helps to warm up the muscle tissue. Now, dynamic stretching is things like, and you'll often see this at the start of a move well class, us rotating the arms or moving the shoulders around. And that doesn't just get heat into the tissue, it also helps to release synovial fluid into the joint. Now this is like an internal WD-40, and it helps to lubricate the joint, it helps it move. And that's why when you wake up in the morning, for example, when you start running on a horrible rainy day like this morning and you feel like a pretty old man, well, I am a pretty old man, and it takes, half a mile or so before things start to ease up a little bit and you think, oh, actually I do have legs that function. So that type of stretching is good. It's important though that we start with small movements and then gradually build up. And the key is that once you reach your full range of motion, say we started with a rotation there and forward, and then gradually over time we've got to a full range of motion, that we don't sustain that for too long, that we don't keep taking the tissue and the joint through its full range of motion for a long period of time. That can be quite detrimental. But it's a great way of preparing the body for exercise. You may have noticed that we don't do much stretches where we hold stretches at the start of a class, and research tends to show that that's better done later on at the end of the class when we have plenty of heat in the tissue. And muscle tissue is a bit like plasticine. If you warm it up, it stretches easier. That's why we do those sort of things at the end. Which brings me to another two types of stretching that we favour, and one of those is passive stretching. And passive stretching is holding a stretch for a certain amount of time, but using either another limb or another person or a piece of apparatus to help us with the stretch. So an easy example for me to demonstrate would be, say, a shoulder stretch where we bring the arm across the body, or stretch for the back of the arm, and you're using this limb to pull the arm across. So this area is relaxed and you're using another limb to function out the stretch. The other one would be, and I'm not going to demonstrate it because I'll hurt myself, is, say, the splits. If you had the feet wide apart and you were leaning forward, effectively the ground, the floor, would be the apparatus. I know you're all asking me to do it, aren't you? I would not be able to get very far down. I'd make a right mug of myself. So you can imagine that one. So that's passive stretching. But again, it's holding the stretch in a sustained position, holding the muscle in a sustained position for a length of time, and that's what we are after. There's not many fence posts around here. They've all got big holes in the middle of it, and this one just keeps falling into the middle. Finally, the one that we really tend to use quite a bit, I'm on a bit of an angle now, aren't I? It's a static stretch. And static stretch is very close to a passive stretch. The two are pretty interchangeable, and that's just where we put the muscle into a stretch position and hold it for a certain amount of time. And it takes about 10 seconds at least for the little fibres to give and not just spring back into place. Muscle tissue has elastic properties, and it will just return to its normal position unless we hold it for long enough. So it's important that we're giving it plenty of time. We would suggest that if you're at home and you have plenty of time after a class, then hold the stretches for at least 30 seconds to a minute, obviously dependent on how you're feeling. And that's important as well. So what we're after, I think I'm starting to disappear again, is, stay there. In terms of discomfort, say on a scale of 1 to 10, and we've talked about ratings of perceived exertion before. There's a talk on the website around that. 10 being complete agony, 1 being lying on the sofa. Not beyond the sort of 5/6 in terms of how uncomfortable you feel in that stretch. So we want to feel the stretch, but it doesn't want to be causing you pain. Certainly not sharp pain. So just be careful the sort of the pressure you're putting upon your muscle tissue when you do your stretches. And that's your message from Mull. Hopefully next week we'll be able to put a little sequence together within the exercise of the day, which will work through some basic stretches for major muscle groups. And if you're doing these workouts at home, then you can make sure you follow them up with some stretching. And I'm going to get back to my run. Just a little message about next week. So message from Mull will come down to Mondays and Wednesdays as of next week. We're getting into our sort of normal caseload now, a bit closer to the way we used to work. So we're really keen to keep the WhatsApp group going, but we just need to ease off a little bit. So what you'll get is a message from Mull on a Monday and a Wednesday. You'll get the exercise of the day. It's a bit like soup of the week, isn't it? That'll come on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and that'll cover most of the week, and it gives us a little bit more time to focus on our normal work, which we're slowly coming back to. So I hope that was helpful. Any questions, as always, please send them in to our personal WhatsApp group, and I'll catch up with you after the weekend, and I hope the weather certainly improves a little bit for tomorrow and Sunday. Okay, take care guys, and stay safe. Bye bye.